Hello, and welcome to the Virtual Valley Wine Tour, sponsored by the Sentara Rockingham Memorial Hospital Auxiliary. My name is Leah Hayworth, and I'm here with Louise Butler, and we are co-chairs of the Auxiliary. The purpose of this virtual event is to help raise money for the Sentara RMH Hahn Cancer Center in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Although it was built just 10 years ago, it's in need of upgrades and improvements in order to keep up with the needs of our growing community. All proceeds from the sale of the wine packages for this event will go towards the Cancer Center, an important and valuable resource to the Shenandoah Valley. We are here at beautiful Bricks and Columns Vineyards in McGahkeysville, Virginia, and we are joined by the winemakers from all three vineyards who participated in our Valley Wine Tour, including Bricks and Columns, Cross Keys, and Bluestone Vineyards. We thank you, the viewers, for your purchase of the 3 packs of Cabernet Franc or Vignette, or both, as in our case. This is the first time these Shenandoah Valley wineries have joined together to offer a package featuring the same grape from 3 different vineyards. So we are excited and grateful to them for their participation and support. We'll be introducing the winemakers and turning this video over to them shortly so they can lead you in your wine tasting. The second part of our virtual fundraiser event is an online silent auction that started March 6th and will run through Monday, March 15th at 8 p.m. So if you're watching this video before the auction ends, you can still bid on lots of exciting items, including Massanutten Water Park tickets, JMU football and basketball tickets for next season, jewelry by local artists, a private flower arranging workshop and lunch for 6 by wonderful local florist Tamara's Designs, a full card detailing by Madadashkar. And we're also showcasing some of the local artwork that's up for auction, including local artists, very famous local artist, P. Buckley Moss, and some beautiful framed needlepoint pieces by local artist Diane Trovoff. And we are lucky to have this beautiful charcuterie platter that's sitting on one of the other items in the auction site. It's a charcuterie platter made from a Chardonnay wine barrel by Nut House Wine and Wood. And they do wonderful, wonderful pieces, useful and decorative, made out of all wine barrels. And our charcuterie platter is courtesy of Crossroads Cafe and Catering here in Penn Laird, Virginia. And that will pair nicely with your wine. So if you want to order one from Crossroads Cafe, please do so. And you can set up your own wine tasting just like this and then follow along with this video. And now I'd like to introduce the winemakers joining us today. First, we have Stephanie Pence, who's the co-owner with her husband Steve of Bricks and Columns Vineyards in McGahkeysville, Virginia. Michael Henney is the winemaker for Michael Schaap's Virginia Wineworks and Bricks and Columns. Steve Munson is the winemaker at Cross Keys Vineyards, located in Mount Crawford, Virginia. And last but not least, Lee Hartman is the winemaker, award-winning winemaker at Bluestone Vineyards, located in Bridgewater, Virginia. So be sure to set 1 glass for each of the wines that you plan to taste with us today. And Stephanie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, RMH, for including us all in this. We're excited to be partnering with you all and giving you an opportunity to try our wines. So as Leah said, I am Stephanie Pence with Bricks and Columns Vineyards. My husband, Steve, and I own the vineyard. We started our vineyard about 6 years ago. We have 11 acres under vine. We opened our winery about 4 years ago. So we have open 7 days a week and have different activities when it's non-COVID. So I encourage you all to come out and join us. Michael Henney, who is with us today, is our winemaker is Michael Schaap's with Virginia Wineworks, and Michael Henney works with him. So we're happy with that partnership and pleased to be working with both of them. So I am also president of the Shenandoah Valley Wine Trail. That is an organization that promotes and supports wineries in our AVA. So it's basically from Winchester down to Lexington. We have about 33 wineries in that each of our wineries are part of this organization. So it's great to have opportunities for camaraderie and education and just to support one another. I think as many of you know, the Virginia wine industry is very supportive of one another. We really try to lift each other up. We try to partner and do as much as we can with each other. So this is a great opportunity for us to do this. Next, I'm going to have Lee Hartman from Bluestone Vineyards introduce himself and talk about their winery. I first want to congratulate him and Bluestone. This week it was announced Governor Cup competition, which is a very prestigious Virginia wine competition. Bluestone placed 3 golds, and on top of that, they were selected as one of the top 12 wines in the state with their 2019 Petit Munson, and that is a real honor. So congratulations, Lee, to you all and to Bluestone Vineyards. So.
Well, thanks so much, Stephanie. It's very kind of you to mention that. I was really impressed this year in the competition. I was really pleased with how Bluestone did, and I'm very proud of my team that I get to work with. But the Valley as a whole did really great, and not only a number of wineries winning gold medals, but also for a real diversity of wine, from red blends to dry whites and dessert wines. So I think the whole Valley showed really well, and I'm hoping that will bring a bit more attention to the region as a whole. But as Stephanie said, my name is Lee Hartman. I'm the winemaker at Bluestone Vineyard. It's my family's farm. We started doing the commercial planting at the property in 2008. Prior to that, we had a kind of a garden vineyard, you know, a row of this and a row of something else, and there was another thing entirely, and you know, just kind of a hobby. And after doing that for a few years, we said, yeah, we know what we're doing. Let's plant 10,000 of them. And we opened our doors in 2011. So we just celebrated our 10th anniversary earlier this year. So we're very excited to be part of the Valley industry. We have about 26 acres covering about a dozen different varietals. That are both our own farm, but also some others in the area who have built an interest in starting a vineyard that we are helping them and managing their properties as well. So very excited to be here, and thanks for having us.
Thank you, Lee. Next, we're going to go to Steve Munson. He's the winemaker at Cross Keys Vineyards. Cross Keys Vineyards is our oldest vineyard in Rockingham County. And Steve has been with them for a while. So Steve, I'll let you introduce yourself, and if you want to say a little bit about Cross Keys Vineyards as well.
Absolutely. My name is Steve Munson. I manage the vineyard and make the wine here at Cross Keys Vineyards. The first vines were planted in 2003 to moderate success, kind of that same idea, I think, early on in the Shenandoah Valley. A lot of people saw the wine business starting to expand, including our owners, and decided to give it a shot, and then realized that maybe they were in a little over their head. So we actually didn't open up the winery until 2008, until we had a good feel for growing the grapes. And since then, we've been expanding 2 to 3 acres every year to this point where we now have 32 acres with 11 different varietals. And that's kind of that spirit of pioneering and experimentation in the Valley that still we try to hold on to and we try to refine. So I think you see that in a lot of our wines and kind of our attitude and what we plant. But for the most part, I'm excited for the wines that we're going to taste today, because they're starting to show kind of the refinement of what we've been working towards for the last 15 to 20 years here.
Thank you, Steve. And next we'll go to Michael Henney. So as I said, we work with Michael Schatz from Virginia Wineworks, and Michael Henney is the winemaker there. And so Michael has been in the Virginia wine industry probably the longest of any of us. He has a great history with Virginia wine. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Michael. You're on silent.
You're muted.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Henney. As Stephanie was saying, I'm the winemaker with Michael Schatz Wineworks. So Yeah, I've been making wine in Virginia since 1990. So we're really excited to see all the great strides we've kind of made through the years. Identifying different grapes that grow well here, different sites. But I'm especially excited to be working with Bricks and Columns, because for a number of years now, my feeling has been, when people ask, well, what's the next exciting thing in Virginia? And for me, the next exciting thing in Virginia, it isn't a new grape or a new technique. It's the place. Like the Shenandoah Valley has a number of great natural advantages in terms of weather, rainfall, limestone soils, elevation, and I think it's there's more and more attention coming to the valley. So I'm really excited to be participating in this tasting today. And yeah, excited to be here.
Thank you, Michael. So thank you also for saying that about the Shenandoah Valley. I think we're all really excited to be here, and we hear people say we're the, we're the very sought after place to grow grapes, just because of our climate and things. And we feel that way, but we're a little biased as well. But we do think there are things that validate our thoughts on that. So next we're going to move on to the wine tasting. So if you all have purchased the Vignets, there we have a Vignette from each of us. So this is called a horizontal tasting. So what we're tasting is the same wine, the same vintage year. So the vintage year is the year that the grapes were actually harvested, not necessarily the year that the grapes were made. So this is all 2019. What is exciting about all three of these wines for you all is we have neither of the three vineyards have released these in our tasting room, and it will probably be a little while, I know, at least for us, before we release it. So you're getting a preview of our 2019 that nobody else is getting. So we hope you enjoy that. Vignette is a grape from France. So we plant it here in Virginia. It is Virginia's state grape. Of course, it's a white grape. It often has notes of stone fruit to it. It grows, it's a fickle grape, is my understanding. We experience that on our vineyard site as well. Some years it does great, some years it doesn't. It can go from plant to plant. So it just really, it's a very interesting grape to work with. We love it. And I think most Virginia wineries do carry it. So for our horizontal tasting, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the Cross Keys Vineyard Vignette, and I'm going to let Stephen tell us a little bit about it, about how it was made. Also, Stephen, do you mind just talking a little bit about the 2019 growing season and what that looked like for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So 2019 for us in the Shenandoah Valley was absolutely exceptional. But the story of this Vignette kind of is a reflection of multiple different vintages. I think with wine, you're always thinking about the previous vintage, and you're always kind of thinking about the next vintage. And stylistically, we want our wines to be reflective of the time they were grown, but at the same time, we want to also be very reflective of the place and the methodology on how it's made. So the vineyard here was planted in 2014 for Vignette, and our very first crop came off in 2017, and that's when we really started our experimentation. 2017 was another fantastic vintage here in the valley. So we picked some very early, we picked some a little bit later. And a difference between oak barrels, stainless steel, and kind of a hybrid system between the two. Really trying to figure out what the Vignette from here should taste like. What are its strong suits? And then what we noticed is acidity can be a challenge in Vignette. Acidity is a strength of the Shenandoah Valley. We tend to hold acidity a lot better. And I consider acidity here kind of our identifying marker, kind of a true note that we try to hold through all of our wines. So it's something that we take very, very seriously to try to maintain nice, fresh, and zippier wines. So in 2018, we had a little a challenging of a vintage, and I think Stephanie will talk about that later. And that was kind of the time when we realized, well, we can still get the style that we were looking for, the aromatics we were looking for, based on our experimentation, kind of if we look for the grapes in certain conditions. So what that led to is an extremely hot and extremely dry 2019, where we were seeing a lot of sugar loading, so very sweet grapes, potentially very high alcohols, potentially a lot of residual sugars in some wines, and also a decrease in acidity. But based on that experimentation and kind of the direction we wanted to take the wine, where we thought it showed itself best, we decided to pick this grape mostly just based on the acidity that we were measuring out in the vineyard prior to harvest. So this was actually picked relatively early in comparison to other grapes, because we wanted to maintain acidity on the wine, because we did not enjoy wines going a little bit more towards the softer, flabbier side. We just didn't think that it was characteristic of our property. And so the other thing we've kind of touched on or discovered through experimentation was, because we were picking early enough to maintain that acidity, we weren't going to get some of those super ripe tropical flavors that you're going to get out of Viognier. And so we really opted for kind of a novel way of fermenting it, where we actually use barrels, but they're completely made out of stainless steel. And we keep the wine pretty much out of contact with oxygen throughout its entire aging. We still do a lot of intense lees stirring, which is stirring up the yeast that fermented the wine, and that can really build mouthfeel and create a richer wine. But we found that the combination of stainless steel with that lees contact in a barrel shape led us to a fresher, more, that stone fruit, lighter, almost some grassier notes we get out of the Viognier, a more elegant and thinner wine. But we were able to build up the body to more familiar Viognier territory with that intensive lees stirring. So that was our approach to making it. And I hopefully, as you smell and taste the wine, you can kind of get those notes of, for me, it's almost a little bit of boxwood, some stone fruit, definitely like white peach. And that underlying grassiness we find very interesting, very different. It was something that we found in experimentation that we wanted to exploit in the future. So even in a vintage where you could have gone incredibly ripe, we wanted to maintain that kind of fresh and acidic and a slightly herbal and aromatics to it.
It's very good, Stephen, and I am picking up on the grasses of it. And I also thought it was interesting how you mentioned the white peach versus a different colored peach, a more orangish peach. And I think that was a really good term describing it. So really enjoy it. Very nice.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, next we're going to move on to Lee. So if you can tell us a little bit about how you made your 2019 Viognier.
Sure. So we've been making Viognier at Bluestone since 2011. We have been working with Silver Creek Vineyard and Orchard down in Tyro, Virginia, for pretty much that entire time. We don't grow Viognier on our estate, but whenever we are sourcing fruit from another vineyard, we like that to be about an hour away or less. We would like it all needs to come from Virginia, and we also would like that elevation to be above 1,000 feet. So Silver Creek fits that bill. They do a great job of growing fruit and supplying grapes to some of the best wineries in the state, and we're really proud to be amongst their email list on that. So what we did is in 2019, as Steve was saying, a very, very hot, very dry year. Things were just cruising along. When you have a year like that, where you don't have a lot of rain, you don't worry about hurricanes coming up the coast. You don't worry about too much humidity. The wines kind of have a sense of making themselves. You don't have to mess with them too much, which is great, because when you mess with your wine, they kind of taste like they've been messed with. So 2019, just across the board, really wonderful wines. The way that we process this fruit when it came in, it was a little bit less acid than normal, but because it is grown at a higher elevation, there is still some of that freshness to it. a little bit higher sugar due to the year. So this one comes in at about 13.5% alcohol. We ferment it all the way dry. But probably some of the most important things that distinguish our Viognier from others is that we don't crush and destem this white wine. When you are making white wine, one of the first decisions you have to make is, will I crush and destem these clusters? And when you do that, it makes processing much more efficient, but it also means that your juice is going to be soaking with the skins and the seeds, and that can do a couple of things to your wine. It can help build some texture. It can help raise the aromatics, but it can also create some bitterness, and it also will raise your pH. And so Viognier is not a varietal that often has excessive acidity to it. It usually has an already high pH. So we do want this to be a nice aromatic varietal wine, but so by whole cluster pressing it and just putting those clusters directly into the press and squeezing the juice out to go to the tank before it has any chance to macerate on the skins and pick up those phenolics and aromatics, we are able to make a bit of a cleaner style wine. It takes a little bit longer to process because the press can only hold about 1 ton of fruit instead of about 3 tons of fruit when you crush and stem it. And then we let that juice settle for a few days in a very cold stainless steel tank. And during that time, it's kind of like when you have a bottle of Simply Orange juice in the fridge and everything kind of settles to the bottom. We do the same thing. We just do it, 500 gallons at a time. And then we take that good clarified juice from the top and we put it directly into our barrels, and then we get rid of the goop at the bottom. And those barrels are where the wine will live until it's about time for bottling. So about 10 months later. And we don't typically use oak for our Viognier. We use acacia, which also comes from France. It's a lighter toast on that barrel interior, and it's also not so sweet as oak can sometimes be. My office is right next to the laundry room. So by using acacia, it doesn't have such a heavy effect to this wine, which already kind of has a broad palate and a bit of a weightier white. So by using acacia, it has a bit of a more uplifting structure, and I've really grown to appreciate that since we started working with it about 5 or 6 years ago.
Thank you, Lee. It is the wine is very clean and crisp. I think that description is very good. I do get some of the stone fruit, some of the peaches on it.
Yeah.
So especially on the nose, I'm getting a bit of that. So very nice. Thank you.
Yeah. We in 2019, sometimes things are just really great and wonderful quality. Unfortunately, we only got about 2 tons of fruit that year, so we only were able to make about 120 cases of this. So glad our first cases went to a good cause, and thanks for drinking our wine.
Oh, thank you. Steve, just going back to you real quick, how long did you age yours in stainless?
9 months. Yeah. So intense lees stirring for about 6 of those months, and then kind of finishing for the next 3.
Okay, thank you. All right. And Michael, so we're gonna go to you. So Michael made our Viognier with bricks and columns. So I'll let you talk a little bit about the wine and the style in which it was made.
Sure, fantastic. Before I kind of talk about the bricks and columns Viognier, I want to talk a little bit maybe about the role that Viognier has played in the Virginia wine industry. So Viognier is a grape originally from the Rhone Valley in France. There's a prized, legendary, but obscure appellation called Condrieu. And in the 70s and 80s. I can't remember the acres left, but there were maybe 5 or 6 acres of Viognier in the world. So it was close to the edge of extinction. But around this time, a number of winemakers, and particularly in parts of California, were interested in exploring grapes beyond Chardonnay and beyond a lot of the Bordeaux reds that they were growing. So there was a lot of interest in, say, Syrah, Mervet, different grapes from the Rhone Valley, and also Viognier. I was a longtime winemaker at Horton Vineyards, and my boss, Dennis Horton, in 1989, in the 80s, he had taken a number of trips to the Rhone Valley as he was looking to plant his vineyard in Virginia, and he was really impressed about what he saw, some of the similarities between maybe the climate and the rainfall in the Rhone Valley and what he was seeing in Virginia. So in 1989, when he was establishing the Berry Hill Vineyard in Orange County, it was a 55-acre planting. He planted 13 acres of Viognier, which is a super bold move at the time, when not a single vine of Viognier outside of the Cornell Research Station had ever been planted on the East Coast. In 1992, he had a small vintage that was promising. They kind of liked the results of it. In 1993, it was a vintage very similar to, say, 2019. It was a dry, warm year, and that Viognier just got wonderfully ripe, and it really kind of hit the market at the right time. I think it was the first time that people were talking about Virginia wines in a positive way in a national or international context. And to this day, I'll meet Napa Valley winemakers like that 93 Viognier. So I think it was really kind of a breakout grape for Virginia that kind of brought some attention to our state. So yeah, so I'm very excited to kind of continue working with Viognier here. And so just want to talk a bit about the wine that we've made for Bricks and Columns. So Stephanie and Steve, how many acres of Viognier do you have planted?
Currently, we only have one.
One acre. Yep. So So as Bricks and Columns grows into being able to work with estate fruit, until that time, we source grapes as needed. So the 2019 Viognier was sourced from a number of different vineyards. So the blend in total is about 92% Viognier, 5% Roussanne, another Rhone varietal, and I think we've got about 3% Riesling from Shenandoah Vineyards in there. And with the Viognier portion, it's from several different vineyards. There's from a vineyard called Hanali in the Monticello AVA, which is a hot site with an east-facing aspect. It was planted in 1998. That was blended with 2 other vineyards, one from Upper Shirley, which is east of Richmond. They're on sandy alluvial soils there. The wines aren't quite as aromatic or expressive as what we get from Hanali. And the remainder of it came from Mountain View and the Shenandoah Valley, which has a really neat, it's grown just on limestone soils, has a very unique Viognier scent that we don't see from elsewhere. So so with this wine, it's a blend of a number of kind of different vineyard sites. It's a blend of tank fermented and some barrel fermented. I really kind of like blending the two with the tank fermented. You get just nice freshness, nice clean flavor to it. But I do like some of the lees work we do in neutral French oak barrels that bring some richness and complexity to the mouthfeel. And then we blended in a little bit of Roussanne to give it even a bit more complexity there. So so that's what's going on with this wine. Yep.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you also for giving us some of the history of Viognier and Virginia. You have been with Virginia Wine for quite a long time, and Dennis Horton at Horton Vineyards was one of the founders of Virginia Wine. He was one of the first big vineyards that was planted. So thanks for sharing that history.
Sure.
So on our wine, I get a little more honeysuckle to it, a little more sweetness to it, a little more honeysuckle as well with it. So, but yeah, so as you see, 3 very different styles of wine made differently. So I think it's just really interesting. You know, some of it is the terroir, where it was grown, where the grapes were harvested, and then also the style of the winemakers and how they chose to do it, as Steve did, and they did stainless tanks. Lee did acacia barrels, and then we did a mix of both stainless and neutral French oak. So it gives each wine just a little different flavor to it. So I think that's to me, that's very fascinating and interesting. So thank you, you all, for sharing about that. So next we're gonna move on to our Cab Francs. So our Cab Francs, we're doing what is called a vertical tasting. So we're tasting the same wine, but 3 different years. So we'll start with the Bluestone. It's a 17 Cab Franc, and then we're going to go to the Bricks and Columns 18 Cab Franc, and then Cross Keys, their 19 Cab Franc. When you pour each of these wines, as Leah said, it's best if you can pour the 3 glasses and look at them. It's nice to compare their color. It's nice to just go back and forth and taste different things on different ones. The Cab Franc, you are going to see a significant difference in color. And you'll see that our 18 was a year we had a lot of rain. And so Michael Henney will address that. But as well as our year of 17 and 19 were very strong years for grapes. So Cab Franc is, of course, a red wine, a red grape that is grown in Virginia. I think it's grown very well. There's been a lot of talk about how well it does in Virginia, and especially the Shenandoah Valley. Again, this is a varietal from France. It's one that we have over here. So anyway, so we are going to start with the 17 Cab Franc from Bluestone. And Lee, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about that.
Sure, thanks. So in 2015, well, actually prior to 2015, we started talking about expanding our vineyard. And so in 2015 itself, we actually decided to do that. We doubled the size of our vineyard. We were up to a little bit more than 22 acres then at that point. And a very major part of that expansion was to plant Cabernet Franc. We had been working with some purchased Cab Franc before, but we wanted to bring all of that under our roof and out into our fields, so that we could take it all the way from the rootstock all the way to putting the cork in the bottle. And so we planted 3 acres in 2015. We saw our first harvest in 2017. So this wine comes from very young vines. I think sometimes that can give you a bit of a fruitier style wine. Sometimes those roots haven't made it too far down into the soil. Those same vines today are digging much deeper, looking for moisture. And so we use clones 327 and 214. So they are fairly different. You can even see the size of the berries and the size of the clusters are much bigger on the 327, which may sound fairly inconsequential, but when you have really tiny berries like you have in the 214, you have a much greater ratio of skin, which is where your color comes from, to the juice, because you have these really tiny little things that don't have a lot of juice in them. We ferment them separately, and after about a month of time on the skins, and really has a lot of time to extract color and some structure, we end up bleeding out as much of the wine as we can from the tanks, and putting those into separate tanks so they can start to settle. Meanwhile, we take what's left in the original tanks, all the stem, or if there's any stem material, the skins, the seeds, and then we load that into the press, and we squeeze out any remaining juice that's in there. You can almost think of it like if you've ever made a cup of tea, and at the end of letting your tea steep, you can you can squeeze that last little bit out of the tea bag. But if you just tasted what was in that tea bag, it's going to be very bitter, and it's going to have a much more pungent character to it. The same can also be done with grapes. That stuff that comes out easiest from the tank is going to be very smooth, and the stuff that goes to the press, while not being bad, it might have a bit more of a bite to it. So we keep that lot separate, and that goes to another bottling. So everything that is in our 2017 Cabernet Franc is what we call the free run, the stuff that just comes out of the tank through gravity. And so because of that, I think it gives it a nice smoother character. This is aged in 50% new oak, so a fair amount of oak on this wine. We use both French and Hungarian barrels. The difference between the two, they are much more similar than, say, French and an American barrel. American oak is Quercus alba, which is American oak, and if you are working with French or Hungarian oak, those are both Quercus petrea. So those are the same species of oak, but just grown in different countries, and the way that their forests are regulated is a little different. So anyway, very, very pleased with this wine. I look forward to bringing in Cabernet Franc every year. I've been excited to be able to do different experiments with it, with whole cluster inclusions and different oak types. But I really think that this is a standout wine, not just for Bluestone, but for the whole valley. I think that if you are making a red wine, a lot of times people want a big, robust style wine, something that's higher in alcohol and has some real punch to it. But if you don't have that acidity, then it's just fat and flabby. And I think that is such an important part of not only our white wines, but these red wines as well. So really, really pleased with how balanced it came out. Glad that this will age for a number of years, and it also goes really well with food.
It's very good, Lee. I
Thank
love
you.
the nose on it. I have to say I love the nose on a couple different reds. Cab Franc is one of them. It's just that nice oaky, earthy smell. I do get a lot of that fresh berry in there that you talked about. So just very fruity, very nice. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Michael Henney, we're going to go to you next. So if you want to talk about 2018, if you'll talk a little bit about the growing season, and then we can go from there. Yep.
Great. Yeah, well, Lee, thanks so much. It was great hearing you talk about Cabernet Franc and the importance to the valley, which I'm definitely right with you on that. I feel like arguably of all the grapes we grow in Virginia, Cabernet Franc perhaps has the most potential. And my reason for thinking that is we're, we kind of talked about terroir a little bit, so that, just the concept that the great grapes grown at Bluestone versus Cross Keys versus Bricks and Columns can have distinct characteristics repeated vintage after vintage, just because of the site that they're grown on. And I think along with Pinot Noir, no red grape expresses terroir in such a clear, transparent way as Cabernet Franc. So I think that's site-driven Cabernet Francs is something we're just beginning to explore in Virginia, and I think there's going to be a lot of excitement with that in the years to come. So with doing the vertical tasting today, so we've got the 17 vintage, the 18 vintage, and the 19 vintage. Both 17 and 19 we would think of as kind of sunny, dry vintages that would have allowed us to achieve really nice physiological ripeness in the grapes and make deep, rich reds, age-worthy reds. 2018 was a different story. So, once every hopefully 7 or 8 years, hopefully not too much more often than that, but definitely 2018, 2011, 2003 come to mind as very challenging vintages in Virginia, where there just weren't a lot of great ripening opportunities with all of the rain coming in. But you know what? The grapes are still out there, and we've got a super skilled bunch of winemakers in Virginia, and we've got a lot of techniques in the vintage to try to take the best advantage we can of vintages like this. So for me, it's always respect the vintage. So in 2018, we should not be trying to make a 2017 wine, and maybe some of the techniques and use of oak that Lee was talking about would probably be similar to what we would do in a riper vintage like 2017, but our thinking's much different in 2018. So with making a red wine, we're not looking for, you know, a very deep extracted red with a lot of oak. Rather, we're looking to make a more delicate, aromatic, easy drinking, expressive red here, just kind of given the raw materials that we were working with. So yes, Stephanie was saying the color's a bit lighter than some of the other reds. But I think one thing that surprises us in some of these challenging vintages is oftentimes they're very kind of enjoyable, easy drinking reds that are great for to be consumed when they're young. And I hope you're able to find some enjoyment in the wine that way. Yeah, so Bricks and Columns has some Cabernet Franc that has gone into this wine. So this blend is 10% from Bricks and Columns. 80% of the Cabernet Franc here came from Delphos. So that's a vineyard in the Monticello AVA. Earlier, Lee was talking about Silver Creek Vineyard. So Delphos has a similar aspect, but they're about 15 miles north. But yeah, high up in the mountains, granite, decomposed granite soils. It's one of the few terraced vineyards in the state, so it's kind of interesting that way. And then in addition to that, we blended in 10% Chambourcin from the Shenandoah Valley. And that's what made up the wine here. Yeah, and this wine, very, very restrained use of new oak here. So mostly neutral oak in this wine.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. So
for 2018, we bought a whole bunch of new barrels that we ended up not even using. And then we used them the next year. So I agree. There's no point putting a bunch of oak to a wine that maybe you should enjoy in its youth. So
yeah.
Good call.
Yep. Thanks for saying that too, Lee. So my confession is when I first had our 2018 Cab Franc, I was my heart just sank because I'm used to a heavier Cab Franc, and but we have been very pleased with this. It's a light Cab Franc, nice to drink on summer days if you're having a lighter meal and you want a red. We are very pleased with it. I also want to say Matthew Finot over at King Family had made a statement once, and someone asked him what was the wine he was most proud of making. And he said, it's not a wine during a good vintage, but to produce a drinkable wine in a bad vintage. And 2018 was truly a bad vintage. Many people did not even try to make reds. So for Michael Henney and your group making a very drinkable, very pleasing red, congratulations to you. I think we're very pleased with it. It's not what our normal Cab Franc is, but we are very pleased with it. So thank you for your work in that.
Yeah, and you know, I think that maybe touches on one thing that makes Virginia very interesting is that we have different vintages, and each vintage has its own story to tell. So ultimately, I think that's super exciting that yeah, not every vintage is the same and can give us a different style of wine. So ultimately, I think that's a strength.
Yes, I think so too. So, all right, Stephen, we'll let you talk about 2019 and Cross Keys Cab Franc.
Yeah, So 2019, I think will be remembered as a great vintage. I think it already is. This wine is still quite young, but I think it has a lot of aging potential on it as well. So I would recommend before you drink it, make sure you get some air, either leave the bottle open or swirl it. This is a wine that we wouldn't really expect to release for probably at least another 8 months. We do make all of our wines, we put them in bottle ready to drink, but this could probably use a little bit of oxygen, or a decanting would be wonderful for this wine to try to get the true character of it. So for us, as the vineyard began expanding since 2003, we looked at what was originally planted and what was working very well. One of the original blocks we had was Cabernet Franc. It's clone 1, which is kind of the only clones that you could get back in 2001 when they started ordering Cabernet Franc. It's planted east to west orientation on some of the richer soils on our property. And it's spaced 6 by 9, so a relatively low density planting. And that's just kind of the way things had always been done, I think, for a long time here. We are very happy with the fruit. It always made a nice wine, but we are seeing tannin textures off of our Petit Verdot and Touriga that really seem to indicate that we had more potential for Cabernet Franc on the property. So as we develop new areas, some of the, it's funny how thinking will change over the years, because a decade after that was planted, we're looking at the little section of the property that is too rocky, not enough soil, really thin stuff, grass barely grows there. And instead of thinking, oh, we can't put grapes there, we're thinking we should put our best grapes right here. This is it. So if you go to this Cabernet, the second Cabernet Franc vineyard that we vineyard block that we put in, the dirt is not really dirt. It's just we have shale here in the valley. It originally was limestone it's a complicated geological process, but essentially it was limestone mud that layered up, got upshifted. So it's a nice vertically oriented shale, and it just falls apart, very friable. So the floor of this vineyard is littered with these little tiny shards of shale. It dries out first. And we can irrigate, but we don't. Barring extreme drought situations, we don't irrigate. We try to get the vines to work for their own water. So even in 2019, it was completely dry farm. Even when they started showing some signs of drought stress, we would just wait till later in the week. We get enough rain to make it. So the vines spent the entire season kind of on edge, and it really primed them to start ripening that fruit very, very early. So we had a wonderful ripening season. And we started to see these major differences between the clones. So 214 is in that drier, shalier vineyard spot, whereas that clone 1 east-west up on the hill. And it's a blessing that we have some of that earlier ripening, newer clones in that nice vineyard, because in 2018 we were still very happy with the quality of wine we were able to get from the newer vineyards, the younger vineyards, while the older vineyard was dedicated just to rosé production. So we have that flexibility. And then ironically, in 2019, we found that the younger vines were ripening too much. They were getting incredibly high in sugar. We were losing acidity at an alarming rate. And so that original block that I was always frustrated with, always wondered, oh, why did they plant clone 1 here? Well, you have a perfect vintage, and now you understand why you have clone 1. It was exceptional. We actually did bottle a separate bottling of just that clone, which if you had asked me 4 or 5 years ago, would you make a clonal bottling of clone 1 Cabernet Franc, I would have told you you're crazy. But 2019 was a wonderful vintage for all the grapes, and that variety of the different sites where we grow the Cabernet Franc really allowed us to have some flexibility, maintain the signature acidity that we look for in our wines. So this is about 40% of the older clones, and the other 60% is from the younger stuff. The way we process red wines here, we do everything by hand picking into small lugs. Then we very gentle distemming process. And in 2019, being such a good vintage, it was a lot like 2017, except there was no end date for us. In 2017, eventually we had some rain coming in middle of October, and we said, okay, let's pick the grapes. They're perfect. Let's go. In 2019, we sat there and watched and wondered, well, we don't have to pick now. We can wait. And eventually it came to, we just have so much sugar that it's time to pick these grapes. And the result of that is we developed very intense tannins. So especially after 2018, being ready to attack the wine and really work on it and make sure we could, do a good job in a bad vintage, we end up with an exceptional vintage, and you have to pinch yourself and tell yourself, stay out of it. Don't mess with it. Don't screw up something that's going just right for you. So all we did with this wine was a gentle destimming. We did not crush the fruit. It went into tank for, on average, about 14 days. This is comprised of about 4 different Cabernet Franc lots. So anywhere from 12 to 17 days is how long we spend in the tank. During that period, we want our Cabernet Franc to not be a super tannic heavy wine. We want it to be very expressive of fruit. And so we do a lot of extraction with pump overs. So we drain the wine from the bottom of the tank and then pump it back over the top. We find that gives us really good temperature control to control our extraction. And it also brings more of those skin tannins into the wine, less so the seed tannins. And as we extract over that course of the 2 weeks, it's a constant period of tasting and tasting. And as soon as we start thinking we're building too much tannins, that's when we decide to press. So the wine's pressed gently. My philosophy is if it's good enough to drink, if good enough to go to a barrel, it's good enough to go into the wine. So I taste as we come off the press. We usually go extremely gently on the press, and we'll blend, trying to find the right texture in the main tank, and then go down for aging. So this spent 20 months in 80% neutral oak. We only used about 20% new French oak. Tight grain French oak is the only oak I use. I don't even really look for oak flavor on the Cabernet Franc. For me, it is just about defining the tannins in the mid palate. You can find sometimes, especially if you extract your wines a lot, we get kind of a bitterness on the back end, and it almost makes the wine seem watery in the middle of the palate. So I just use oak to try to build up the mid palate a little bit, and then use that extended aging to try to tone some of the tannins we got out of that rich 2019 year. And then we do all of our blending at the end, just a few months before bottling. So we knew we had some good Cab Franc there, but this was a 2 or 3 month process of finding, that's when the appreciation for our Block 2 Cabernet Franc Clone 1 really came into play, that we have a good Cab Franc. It's really fruity, but it lacks acidity. It lacks a little bit of focus. It lacks elegance. And then as I found, the blending just kept incorporating more and more and more of what I thought was our inferior Cabernet Franc, but in 2019 just turned out to be a lifesaver for us. And so the wine itself, definitely darker fruits. I hope we don't really get any cooked fruit notes. We're not looking for jam or fruit leather or anything like that. I just want like a fresh blackberry, maybe a blackberry cobbler, because you get a little bit of that cooked note from the barrel. But yeah, really respectful to the fruit is our goal with Cabernet Franc.
Stephen, it's very nice, very well balanced. And especially for a young wine. Thank you for mentioning about it being young and aerating the wine. So I think, as you were kind of alluding to, this would be great to age for a couple years, probably in bottle. And the aeration really is a key factor to enjoying wine. So if you have a decanter, that is great. If you don't, sometimes just using a pitcher and pouring the wine into it and swirling it for a few minutes is a great way to aerate it as well. So, thank you. Thank you, Steve, Lee, and Michael, for joining us this morning and taking a portion of your day to tell us about your wines. We really appreciate that. And thank you, RMH, for including us in your fundraiser. We really enjoyed being part of this. We hope that you as the viewers enjoyed it, that you were able to learn a lot. As you can see, we are always happy to talk about wine. We could go on for hours if you would like, but we won't torture you with that. But we have lots to say and lots we'd love to share. It's because we have a passion for it, and we really like to share our knowledge with you. So I'm sure at any of the vineyards that you would visit, Cross Keys, Bluestone, or Bricks and Columns, we're happy to share with you any of our, with our wine processing or just flavors, tastes, growing seasons, whatever. We're always happy to share knowledge. That's a big part of being a winery in Virginia. So does anybody have anything else they want to say before we turn it over to Leah? All right, well, thank you. And we'll turn it over to you, Leah and Louise.
Thanks, and thanks to our winemakers and vineyard owner. And thank you all for joining us today. What we hope will be is the first annual Virtual Valley Tour, Virtual Valley Wine Tour, and for supporting local businesses, local wine, and our local cancer center. So cheers.
Cheers, and thank you.
All right, I'm just gonna stop recording.